meeting of the Virginia City Council consisting of 3 members of the Personnel Committee to discuss the items that are on the agenda today. And that would be Councillor Freely, Councillor Paulson, and myself, Mayor Cuffey. And so we have 3 items on the agenda today. And I think that we'll start with item number 2 on the agenda. If we could skip around, please, to accommodate some of the staff that are here, to review the professional services agreement for the tennis professional. And I would like to hear from Brian, our Park and Rec Director, with respect to this, and then maybe some comments from our city administrator, and then to the committee members themselves, and anybody who would like to chime in. Brian, good morning.
Good morning. In your packet, you will have a updated contract that we are proposing for Dave Gunderson, our tennis professional. His contract did end on December 31st of this past year, so would be very beneficial to have him continue working under a contract.
Okay, thank you. Well, how about giving us the highlights?
Highlights are basically keeping it very similar to what it has been, but also working in a 3% raise for him over the next 3 years. It is a 3-year contract. Also, one of the other highlights that we have in there is that we are requesting that that he take over the management of the summer rec tennis program if that becomes a need for the city in the future. And at that point, we would also adjust the staffing levels and budget for the Tennis for All building.
And just to clarify for those who are present and non-committee members, this 3% increase is 3% per year, or is it 3% over the 3 year?
3% per year.
Per year increase. And of course, the additional duties and responsibilities assigned to that with his potential of taking over the summer park and rec or tennis program, as well as an annual adjustment based upon the contractual agreement and the as we move forward with the.
And I just want to make clear that he would only be taking over the summer tennis program if the need arises, right, and we did not have somebody else that was running that program.
Okay, thank you. So this is a contract that you're recommending?
It is.
Thank you. Council Paulson, committee member.
Thank you, Mayor. Brian, on the summer tennis program, did those allocated dollars come out of the tennis professional budget or the actual Tennis for All budget to pay the summer team that was running the summer lessons?
Right now, it comes out of the Park and Rec budget, and if we need to move it under the Tennis for All, we would also need to move that portion of the Park and Rec budget to the Tennis for All budget.
Okay, so it would just be a matter of shifting the budget numbers, but the dollars are actually allocated accordingly. Okay. And then on the, is there any other differences in the contract, like the 75% of the revenues and 25%?
All of those are identical to
They're
the previous
identical?
contracts.
Okay. So one quick question is the 3% per year. How was that arrived at?
He asked for a lot more, and this is what we are recommending.
Okay, thanks for that.
We have to point out, Mayor and Council, the one in your packet is the one that he recommended. We had actually proposed something different, and I didn't get it in the packet. We had proposed was a 3% escalating every year. So we'll get that to you. So this is the dollar amount he wanted. In our idea, this would be the end of the 3 years is what he would get. So he was trying to jump quite high.
So by the end of by the 3, 3, and 3,
Yep, he would
by
get-
end of year 3, it would equate to what the original
asking for.
request was. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And thank you for that clarification, Britt, because I'm looking at the proposal. So the job description is the same as it was before. There's no increase or changes in the job description, aside from the fact that in the event that he needed to take over the summer tennis program, he would be able to do that if necessary. And so the only change to the contract is the proposed salary increase over the 3-year period, And of course, the recommendation that we're going to be, or the decision we're going to make, or whatever recommendation we make as the committee level to move forward to the city council member for the approval would be the recommendation you have. So this isn't your recommendation. The recommendation is a different part of the packet, correct? And that, and with no other changes other than that one codicil. Right. Yeah, that's the other codicil. Okay, thank you. Councilor Freely.
So what's the starting wage for the proposal from the city? It's 32.5 for Mr. Gunderson. Or is the 32.5 a 3% bump from last year, and then you go from there? Right. So I would rather look at what we were thinking in terms of, and then were there not some caveats with regard to his involvement with the programming to elicit some additional revenue, or at least bring us into the black as opposed to the red? And have we moved in that direction, or we've moved in the opposite direction? Are there more people involved in programming there, or less people involved in programming there? And then the other question I'd have, and I know I'm dumping a bunch out, is the $40 per hour figure with regard to teaching lessons. Is that, so that would be, he would, as an independent contractor, be charging those individuals $40 an hour on his own time for his own
Yes,
sake?
that is correct.
Right. So there are potentials for him to have
Additional, yes.
additional income from just being there and
Just like
providing-
our Golf Pro has those additional opportunities by doing private lessons and everything, we have our Golf Pro and our Tennis Pro set up in similar manners.
And as far as you know, the programming has been going without many hitches. I mean, there's like good sharing of the facility with the pickleball versus the tennis people, and that's all been scheduled.
And our pickleball program has been growing.
Good.
So I believe programming overall has been growing. Unfortunately, this past year, it's very difficult to gauge where the growth in programming equates to with revenue growth, because with COVID, the Tennis for All building was shut down for such a long time. So this past year was a very unhappy year for the budget in the Tennis for All building.
And is there an anticipation of Mr. Gunderson having to take over the summer program with the retirement of Mr. Mostyn from the school district, or?
That is just what we are preparing for in the event that it does occur, or in the event that that occurs. We just want to make sure that we have our bases covered and can continue to provide a quality summer tennis program for the youth of our community.
And that too would be on top of the salary he's making as the administrator of the
Yeah.
facility? Okay. So there's plenty of potential there for him to add additionally to his
Additional
income,
revenue or additional compensations.
programming and summer programming. And so,
Yes.
I mean, I would suggest and encourage us to look at a reasonable salary that he's already making with those additional increases from the starting point we were at with him, and then move forward with that. I mean, that's, to me, it seems as though that there's plenty of opportunity for compensation that would be adequate for the responsibilities of the management of that facility. From my perspective, which is basically blank slated because I don't know what it all entails, but knowing Mr. Gunderson as I do and his involvement in the tennis program over the history of this city, I don't know you can find people that are better suited for what we're trying to accomplish there. It seems that certainly in terms of like teaching people how to play tennis and to enjoy that as a life sport and having the skills and capability to do that. As far as administration and management of a facility such as that with the budgeting and all the other aspects that come into play, I don't know what his skills are with regard to that.
He's been very good to work with, especially this past year, looking for some of those USTA grants that we would be eligible for due to COVID. We were able to get one of those grants this past year, so he is good to work with for those grants and budget items.
And the people that are utilizing the facility are favorable towards his administration of that facility, and as far as you're aware?
As is the Tennis for All Board.
Good. All right, thank you much. But I guess I'm looking at seeing what you had initially proposed as opposed to what he had, and move from that perspective as opposed to the one we had provided to us.
Okay, thank you. The cost recovery revenue as opposed to expenses ratio, Sherry, of the budget, what does that show? The Tennis for All facility was historically running in the red significantly, and then over time has moved into the black.
Nope.
Is that not correct?
It's
No, it's still in the red.
So, based on...
less in the red, but we are still in the red, but we're trending in the correct direction until this past year.
Right, prior to COVID, would you say that, what's the percentage? I mean, when we first started out, I mean, it was a significant, and before you came on board with us, Brian, the loss was significant.
I would say before COVID, the year before COVID, we probably operated at a 25% deficit. Would that be fair to say, Sherry?
I'm gonna
So
say,
that equates to what dollar amount?
it's been hovering around 40,000, and now this year it ended in 27,000 deficit.
In the red. Thank you. Counselor Paulson, then we'll go to Counselor Bearable.
Thank you. So this is like, so say the summer with the Mostons, maybe not being a part of the program, that's considered a professional service, is that correct? And do we need to go out for an RFP, or would it just be assumed that Mr. Gunderson would be interested in that position? And if it is considered a professional service, then we would not have to do that. Is that correct? Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Freely, one more time.
Would we consider posting accordingly, though? Or would it be automatically to Mr. Gunderson? Because there may be other qualified people in the community that could step up in regard to that. Or are we thinking that it should all be under that one umbrella?
My thought process is it makes more sense for it all to run under the Tennis for All facility for the simple fact that then you have less issues of coordinating use of the indoor courts with the summer youth program on rainy days and everything, that the tennis professional would be able to plan out more effectively the overall court usage, both indoor and outdoor throughout the summertime, because there wouldn't be a potential lack of communication.
Those responsibilities, though, then he's still under your administrative umbrella in terms of like...
Yes.
I think that's good to know.
Yeah, thank you. Counselor Bearable.
Yeah, I'm not a member of the committee, but I have a question, Brian, for you or for Brett. What happens if we get a COVID pickup again? Does he get this flat salary no matter what, or are there provisions to reduce his salary? Because it's not fair unless we get money out of if they extend COVID dollars. What do we do there, Sherry, or Brett, or whoever? Because I don't think it's fair to pay a person if they're not working.
Hey, Sherry, would you answer that long-winded question?
It's a good question. Charlie, Councilor Baraboo, we had, last year, we actually laid people off, and we let him know. He was laid off.
So he would be one of those that would fit in that category then, correct? Okay, that's all I need to know. Thank you.
And I guess I could just make a couple of comments, if I may. One, whatever the administrative staff recommends, I think if it's recommending an increase, we need to seriously take a look at that, bring back to the community whole meeting for the entire council to discuss. The issue I have where if we're $27,000 in the red, how much farther down we're going to be in the red, what additional revenues is going to be gleaned from post-COVID opportunities within that. The recommendation of staff is to maintain the current contract as stated, and the duties and responsibilities as stated, and the revenue gleaned from the tennis lessons as stated, from a 75% benefit for Mr. Gunderson and a 25% benefit for the city, and by giving an increase in salary of 3% a year as recommended by staff, you know, I guess by looking at that, and unless there's an increase in the amount of lessons that are being given, and so the 25%, how does that offset the cost of that, and does that going to contribute to the deficit even further? That's a concern that I have, and I do understand that, you know, and I support the fact if it's not necessary to go for the RFP and I hope that it's not, because I think Mr. Gunderson has done outstanding work in looking at the history of the Tennis for All facility and the major issues we had over time. We had to bring our former city attorney in to help accommodate and change that, and actually got on the board to make those changes. We've made a lot of progress, leaps and bounds with respect to that. I think we have a professional organization running there. We have a dedicated individual under contract in Mr. Gunderson, and I would like to hope we could see that if we can come up to with an agreement for the next 3 years, that we're able to do that. So thank you. Anybody else have anything? Yes, our city attorney, Brian Lindsay. Brian?
Thank you, Mayor. Not to throw a monkey wrench in this, but I want to make sure that I'm clear. And as I look through here, my understanding is that this is an independent contractor relationship. And as such, I think there's a couple of things that we should always keep in mind. Number one, we've got to be careful what words we use when we talk about our independent contractors. For example, I mean, during the conversation, it made a lot of sense, but we had Sherry saying, well, we just laid them off. You can't.
I was going to. This year was unique. They allowed self-employed people to collect unemployment.
Correct, but as a non-employee, we can't lay him off. We could suspend his contract. We can do a number of other things. The other thing, with regard to the contract, we should put some language in here just to make things really clear, to make sure that he knows that he's responsible for all of his withholdings, taxes, all of that stuff. We're just making a flat payment to him. And then also, one of the other things we've got to be careful about when we talk about this individual being within somebody's umbrella or with somehow within the chain of command for the city, those things also aren't acceptable with an independent contractor. That independent contractor is allowed to deliver services within certain specifications, but technically, aside from monitoring compliance with his contractual terms, he's not really within our structure at all. And so I just kind of wanted not to be a downer, but to bring that to the city's attention. Maybe there's some additional language we could put in the contract. But the reason is, within the past few years, the government has changed how they look at independent contractors, and they've really shown a very clear message that they'll disregard what we call it, and they will assign to it what they believe it is in actual practice. So we just need to be a little extra cautious.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. And so with that information and advice from our city attorney, I think we have to take a look at maybe from this committee, looking at recommending, I'm focusing on recommending that we move to assign city staff to work with our city attorney and work out some contract language to accommodate the private, the contractor-city relationship and clarify clearly in this document that's the case, and to make sure that we as an elected body, address it in an appropriate manner based upon what that relationship is. And I think that was your recommendation, was it not?
It is, Mayor. I don't think it's going to take a lot. I think maybe a paragraph or two of standard language.
Very good. Thank you very much. Councilor Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. So Brian, one more point of clarification then. If in fact we do have to do Mr. Gunderson has offered the summer tennis program, That actually, though, would be, it's not an independent contractor, because that is through the city, so it would be a professional services under the chain of command of our Park and Rec director. Is that correct? So,
I'm proposing that we move those services out of our Park and Rec department into the Tennis for All program, or into,
Under the umbrella.
under the umbrella of the Tennis for All building
then that
and this.
contract would actually either have to be amended if, because that's not under the umbrella right now. The way it is, that,
Right.
that insurance, everything is carried by the city for that summer program for those kids. So how would that work when you've got an independent contractor? When we have, as parents have to sign that waiver, it's a liability waiver from this, on behalf of the city. So I don't know how you move that portion of the umbrella. That's like softball, little league, or whatever is under the city. I'm not sure what all the programs are, but, so I'd like to understand that relationship before we get too deep into this going forward, if that makes sense.
Brian?
Thank you, Mayor. And it does, I think Councilor Paulson brings up a good point. It does create a wrinkle. I think there's ways around it, and essentially, I think we could, at that point, make an amendment to the existing independent contractor agreement, assuming that Mr. Gunderson is willing to take on those additional duties. We could simply amend the contract to include oversight of that program or general direction of that program under his, essentially assign him the obligation to be in charge of that as part of his independent contractor duties. I'd like to take a look at kind of the details of each program to see how they work together, but I'm fairly confident there's a way that we could work it out.
And I see where you're moving. I totally understand where you want to go. I'm just trying to think of logistics. Then when the families pay the fee comes to the city. So if you're, as an independent contractor, how would that fee, how does that work? Because I'm assuming we are going to be in need of a summer.
Yeah. The fee would be paid to the Tennis for All program, which in turn comes to the city.
Okay,
Just like the memberships and court fees, all that, those fees come to the city at this point. The summer tennis program would operate the same way.
and is there private lessons under that summer program as well?
That would be up to the tennis professional to potentially restructure how that, or to structure how that program is operating.
Okay, so I guess I would recommend maybe just coming back and letting us look at the final draft of everything. Just taking all that into consideration, if you are moving that under the umbrella, that everything is in alignment with according to the law and according to, you know, I don't want to see the city lose any revenue if it goes under a different independent contractor umbrella. How is that shared relationship? That doesn't make sense to me. Because I work with, I hire independent contractors, and what they collect has nothing to, it's a separate relationship. So if that could be clarified, that would be great.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And so I think that we're gravitating towards sending this back to staff and our city attorney to work out and address those issues that we brought up, and then bring it back, likely not to the Personnel Committee, but to the Personnel Committee of the whole, at the next scheduled meeting. Would that be enough time to do it for the next scheduled meeting on April the 6th? Is that amenable to the committee? Looking for a motion. Okay,
I would make that motion as you just described.
okay, Council Freely makes the motion to direct staff to review the issues that we have concerning the contract, independent contract with, and the job description attached to that, work with our city attorney, and come back to the next committee of the whole with a recommendation and a draft proposal for us to review. Is there support?
I'll support that.
Support by Councilor Paulson. Did you get all that, Pam? Thank you very much. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye, opposed, motion carry. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Brian, Sherry and Britt. Okay. Go back to number one item on the agenda to discuss the creation of the MEC Facilities Manager position and the MEC staffing model. And you have that in your packet. The committee members have that in their packet. Does any non-committee member like to take a look at it? If they don't have it, I have a copy here. No one else would like to see a copy? Okay, let's move then for that. Britt?
As we've discussed, we know that we were going to need more staff at the MEC once the MEC is fully functional, and knowing that our timeline to hire is between 8 to 12 weeks before somebody's actually in the door, we are here proposing a couple of changes to the the recreation department side of staffing. The first one is we're looking to hire the MEC facility manager. This would be a MAPE position, so it would be a supervisory position, and it would be to help alleviate Brian with some of the duties at the miners building. The way we drafted it, and we're definitely open up for discussion, is that this person would be in charge of basically the facility. It'd be that contact person between whoever's renting the building for whatever purpose, whether it's hockey or a meeting or a trade show, whatever. That's the contact person, is this MEC facility manager, and then Brian's the overseer of all of it. Brian is still the department head. This person would be underneath them.
Okay, thank you. So we'll be looking for, one of the questions that came up was the pros and cons of having it being a MAPE position or having it to be an independent contractor position. So I know there's some pros and cons that were discussed about that. We'll ask you to address that in a little while, but let's first go to our committee members. Councilor Friedlieb.
Well, I mean, and I'm not going to be a naysayer at all, Brian, because I know you're an incredibly busy fellow and you're an incredibly organized administrator, and I do appreciate the work that you've been doing. But in the 60-some-odd year history of my association and affiliation in the city with the facility that we had in place, and having known personally for the last 5 as neighbors of mine that were Park and Rec directors, they took on the tasks of running that entire facility, knowing we're building a brand new one and there's an anticipation for increased programming that we've not seen before, but it's kind of under the guise of the build it and they shall come type of concept. And my concern is, whether it's legitimate or not, I just need to talk about it, is that, you know, we've gone from a city of a population of 14,000 down to around 8,000. And we've had a dramatic loss in population. And even our high school graduating classes have gone from near 400 to maybe 100 plus, even one recently that was under 100. And during the course of my youth, the student programming was significant in this city, in that facility. There were twice as many kids in this town, twice as many people involved in programming in this town than there currently are, to my knowledge. And during the course of the 60 years that the Miners was in operation, I attended concerts, dances, receptions, pancake dinners, home and boat and travel shows, circuses. I played on the basketball floor that was there during the regular season and then coached on it as an adult when I was coaching high school teams. I was also a participant in the youth hockey program, at which time there were far more people involved, as I also was a parent of youth hockey players throughout many years, a high school fan for all of these years. I also took my gun training there. I attended crafts fairs and so on and so forth. So, I mean, there's been tremendous programming that's always been going on in this town until we started having, I guess you would call, an aging and somewhat dilapidation of the facility, which then caused us to lose, you know, people wanting to have dances there, wanting to have receptions there, wanting to do the kinds of things that it had been known for and been utilized for in the past for so many years. And, you know, I still in my head and my heart am, you know, I'm thrilled and excited about the fact that we're getting a new facility, but in my head and my heart, I'm still trying to, you know, grasp the fact that we had $12 million with which to then potentially renovate that building into an additional many years of utilization. And you know, I look at it as though when you go across the range, I mean, you look at Greenway, Hibbing, Chisholm, Evelyn, White Lakes, Ely, Babbitt, they're all still maintaining their facilities and they're functioning accordingly and adequately for the programming that they provide. And I look at, like, we, you know, closed the Washington School, still being utilized, Johnson School, still being utilized, Lincoln School, still being utilized, the Cotton School, now the community center, the Orr School is a community center, the Tower School's been turned into a clinic. I'm troubled by how much we're doing in this area to close things down. And so I'm getting off track, but my point is, it's like we're going to build a brand-new facility, which I'm excited about, and we're going to hopefully get all these things back in there that we've had in the past, and then some, and that's why we've hired people like the Lundin Group. But I'm just not convinced yet, in my mind and heart, that we need an additional personnel to oversee that site in addition to you. And I don't, only you can tell me for sure whether or not that's the reality. But I look at it as like, I see like, okay, we need additional staff because we're going to be rolling out tables, setting up chairs and doing all these things. But, we also had a playing floor that had to be set up and pulled out. I mean, there were other things that were a part and parcel of the facility as we once had that required additional tasks and personnel as well. And in my mind and in my heart, like I said, I don't know that we have that many additional tasks coming forth than what were in the past with regard to the kind of programming that we had at one time when that thing was thriving and booming and being used for subsectional tournaments and so on. So I guess I'm kind of going on a long rant here, and it's like I said, I'm not being a naysayer. If we need this position and you convince me otherwise, then yeah, for sure, I'm going to be on board with that. But right now, with the knowledge that I have, which is somewhat limited in terms of like what you do and how you're doing it, what you need to do to get ready for what we anticipate, you're going to need to convince me further than just the flow chart that I've been provided at this point in time. That's where I'm at.
Thank you, Councilor Freely. Britt, did you have a?
Yeah, with all due respect, we have to remember this is a new facility that's nothing like the current miners. It's completely different. We have a convention center and boardrooms and other facilities. We also have to remember back in the late 90s, or early 90s, we had 12 to 13 people in the park department and students working, 5 students working at all times all year long. We haven't had that in many, many years. I've been here since 1999, and we've just been attritioning ever since. And I just think the ASME staff can agree to that, that we've just been letting people go and not refilling positions because the use wasn't there. Well, I know what Brian's been working. I know he worked 80 hours last week, and I'm not kidding. He literally worked from sundown to sunset all last week for the skate show and to getting everything ready for that. That's not uncommon for Brian, and that's just the one building. Now, Brian has not been able to give due justice to the parks or any other buildings at this time because he's working on building a new building and keeping the old building running. Brian does need help, and Brian can attest to this, and he can speak a little further about it. He needs help. And that's part of also this plan here. You'll see on here, there's 2 new utility workers. We do have a floor planned for in there. We do have things planned for that building that we're going to need staff, and we know we don't have enough people. If you've toured that building, it's massive. I mean, it's huge, and we keep joking we're going to put a Fitbit on just to walk, when we walk the next tour, just to see how big it really is. Get our 10,000 steps in one tour. But it's a big building, and I think yes, it is, if you build it, they will come kind of a thing. But we also do know that Lundins have been booking. So we know events that are coming are not ice related. They have been booking events that have nothing to do with ice. We know the ice schedule is already going to be there. Now we know where that convention's coming to. So things are happening.
Councilor Freely?
And I do appreciate that, Britt, and I understand that, and I'm not aware of all those things, but as those things come forth to give us the knowledge of that calendar of eventing that we're gonna see, so we kind of have an anticipation of what that task responsibility will be. And I think right now you have so many balls in the air, in part because you are managing the construction of a brand-new state-of-the-art facility as well as the programming in an existing. So I mean, I can understand that, but I'm wondering, once that's demolished and gone, and then we transition to the new building, if you'll settle into what needs to be done. I'm just wondering if we're premature, and if we're not, that's fine. I'm convincible and open-eared and open-minded to what we need to do on behalf of yourself as well as the city park and rec department.
Also, keep in mind, this position that we are looking at is their primary duty is going to be when you rent the facility, that they are going to be the person that greets you at the door. They're going to be the person that you go to and say, this isn't right, this needs to be changed. We need help here. Oh, we forgot this, add this. So they're going to be that main point of customer service contact throughout your event. Now, your event more than likely is going to be evenings and weekends. This position is going to primarily be working all those evenings and weekends. Selfishly, I don't want to be working all these evenings and weekends when I'm also working Monday through Friday from 7 to 4. I do have a family that I'd like to see occasionally. I'd like them to remember what I look like. So I can tell you last week and this week are being very productive with booking events. I know last week we have received paperwork on 7 different events, a couple of them weddings. This week Tyler is spending a bunch of time here in Virginia meeting with individuals, signing paperwork for other events. We've got a couple of different shows that are going to be new to the area coming in, which are going to take a lot of staff time to set up and utilize the facility. And it's not just this person that we're going to need. It is, you'll see on this flow chart, there are 2 more utility worker positions that we are going to need. In adding these positions, we are able to work with our existing staff and ask me to come up with a much more attractive schedule for the employees to work that also allows for us to have better building coverage, and therefore be able to provide better services to the public. And I also would like to throw out there that one of the reasons that our parks look so good is because of the dedication that our staff currently has. Even though over the past 20 years we have lost staffing numbers, we have an incredibly dedicated park staff that wants to see our park do more. I don't want them to get to the point that they are burned out and throw in the towel and our parks don't look good.
Okay, thank you. So did you have something further, Councilor Freely?
And that does help, Brian. I mean, you're basically saying we are building it, and by gosh, they are going to be coming. And
they
I
are
guess
coming.
Some of that data would be helpful, though. Seeing calendared events provided to us, like, here's like what's coming, and here's what's coming, and this kind of justifies in my mind, like, okay, I see what we're going to need to do, and I do fully understand, working 80-hour shifts, and I mean, and those evening things that are going to be attending. Somebody that's working all day cannot and should not be expected to be at all the evening events either. I mean, that's just like an imbalance in your work schedule. So we're getting there. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I don't want to get burned out.
Thank you, Councilor Freely. And before we go to Councilor Paulson, just one, I know there was discussion on whether or not there should be a MAPE position or there should be an independent contractor. And some of those things that I'm going to ask you to answer toward the end in relationship to how to, as a MAPE employee, which would be basically a supervisor in some respects, under this, would be able to direct and delegate or coordinate and work with the rest of the union labor staff, asked me 454, in order to accomplish the goals and objectives and tasks that need to be done. As an independent contractor, the question would be, how does an independent contractor, not part of our, as Brian had indicated earlier, how does that individual direct and delegate staff, even though they report to you? So I think that's something that needs to be muddled out and clarified. For me, I don't have a problem with the recommendation moving forward, but I think it warrants just a little bit more discussion.
If I may, just to
Yeah, please.
piggyback what Brian just mentioned, the last topic, when we have an independent contractor, we do not get to direct their work.
Right,
They get
correct.
to come and go as they please and do what they feel is they need to be done. We need somebody that we can help direct their work. So
Yeah.
in this case, the independent contractor would not really work well.
And that information helped me significantly as a committee member. Councilor Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, so I kind of have a lot of, and I really appreciate your input. That just really spoke volumes to me. You've really utilized that facility over the year and all that history. That's impressive. So thanks for sharing that. I see this came forward as a recommendation in 2018 by the Isaac Sports Group study. And up till this point, I have not really been impressed with the Isaac Sports Group at all. So I would like to see that pro forma in terms of the finances and how they shook this down, as this was the necessary step. Was that actually the recommendation for a MAPE employee, or was it a different form of recommendation, just saying we would need somebody in this position. I'm wondering where that recommendation came forward from.
This job description and position, we've basically taken from the National Park and Recreation Association for how the National Park and Recreation Association recommends that departments be staffed. A facility manager for a facility this size and doing the scope of this work is
So this
one
did
of the
not-
positions. So I know the Isaac Sports Group recommended the addition of additional staff. I don't think they necessarily recommended
Wasn't
a
facility manager.
facility manager position. This is utilizing organizations that I'm a member of and the resources that they are able to provide to the city to help better structure the program. In addition, this position will be overseeing some of the positions that we're not talking about today, which would be those permanent part-time position staff that are doing concession stands, that are doing some of the additional programming that we'd be able to run as a city in the building. And I actually do foresee in the future, as this facility generates more revenue, that I'll be coming to you asking for permanent part-time positions that could be solely designated for housekeeping, that would be evening positions. So our Ask Me union has the potential of seeing many different positions added to their union.
Okay, thank you for that. So this, it's on the top left corner, it says as recommended. So this was not actually recommended by,
It was, they called it event planner or event coordinator or something. They had a different title to it. Then taking what we knew, kind of what that position needed to be, we went to Brian's National Park and Rec study and kind of looked at what their models were and said, I think this is more what we are looking for.
okay. Okay, so that being said then, the pro forma that they put forth with the financial information on there, could we get a copy of that to understand the expenditures for city staff versus how that's going to come forward in terms of revenue from the MEC? And then my question is kind of similar to what the mayor had. You know, so now we've got a tennis pro, a golf pro, MEC marketing, and then my next question is, we also have a fitness center that I'm understanding you're possibly going to look at a contractual relationship. So I think there's a lot of moving parts and pieces here, and without jumping to saying, hey, this is what we need, I need more information, kind of like Councilor Friedlieb. I want to know all these moving parts, and without saying anything derogatory, some of the potential partners are having difficulties running their own facilities, and that's very challenging and concerning to me, if that would be a potential partnership coming forward. The other thing is, this is a 100% hospitality. If you do not have a person in that position that is geared toward the hospitality, the bending over backwards, the just the accommodatingness that this type of person requires, that person is not going to be successful, and neither is the MEC. So I would be leaning to, you know, what also would that look like on a contractual or professional services basis or an independent contractor basis? Because I also feel like you're going to have another person stretched like Brian Silber with weekends, and I mean, if that's their only deal is weekends. My expectation as a club member, if I'm going to have a fitness membership, I don't want to be closed down at 7 p.m. like the current, one of the current parties is. So that's very concerning to me as to there's evening events, how that's going to work, how this person is going to fit in, and it's only one person, and it's within that MAPE union. And once you've got that person in place, very difficult to change that position. So that would be my concern as a counselor. Because this facility needs to be run extremely professional. And some of the feedback that I have received, they've already experienced some challenges, and as this is a growth process, I get that 100%, but I'm not completely sold that it is a one-person, one-stop shop. I'm not completely convinced on that. So I'd like to see that pro forma, and then I'd like to gather an actual plan, what the fitness center looks like, what the coordination is with the sports teams, how often are they going to be there, what times in the evenings are they going to be there with Dryland, does everything end at 5? What does that look like with the walking track? There's just a lot of things here that are missing, and I need more information.
Thank you, Councilor Paulson. As a committee, our responsibility is to discuss these things, filter out some of the questions and concerns that will come as we move forward to the rest of the city council for additional discussion and a decision making. And so by directing staff to answer these questions, come up with a financial pro forma, do all those kind of things, and bring it to the next committee of the whole meeting for us to further discuss, I think is important that the entire council ability to make that. So by looking at that, the suggestions that have been made by our committee about, and I'm sure you've taken notes about what we need to do, what we'd like to look at, some of the questions we'd like answered. From my perspective as a committee member is that I think we need a facilities manager. Some of the challenges we have as a contractor as opposed to MAPE is an issue. Yes, well, I think that as we move forward, my thoughts are that it should be in some kind of a bargaining unit contract for this reason. One, it's a recommendation based upon the information provided by our city attorney. How is that an independent contractor going to be to direct and delegate staff about how this facility runs? And I think a facilities manager is a troubleshooter, and this facilities manager is also a hospitality individual. So if you have the personality moving forward, and you're managing the facility itself, and any direction and delegating of that has to come from somebody who has supervisory authority. Now, how you integrate that authority with somebody who is not a part of the city as far as city staff goes, that is a challenge for me, and I think we all want to like that answered. What's the differentiation between how does that work? Is that possible to do? I think it might be, but what are the ramifications of it? I don't think, that is the case. So this is from my perspective. So we have other city councilors who are not on the committee here today, so I'd like to open up for any additional questions to any other city councilor that is present. I see Councilor Bearable has his lid on first. Councilor Bearable.
Yeah, I have some concerns about that position. I don't really care which direction it goes with a union employee, but it could be also an at-will employee in that position that has the authority to discipline and do other things if we so choose, because they have, if you look at what you can pull out of a union, they could have that responsibility. You'd have to post this position if it's going union, correct, Sherry?
There are some guidelines, and I'll let our attorney tell you too, for whether this would be an at-will employee or union.
My concern is you got a MAPE employee at the head, and if you have a MAPE employee down below, there might be heads butting against each other. You have to have some working stuff, but I believe we need to go outside the system for somebody that has the experience and the training in this, because this is huge. If we screw up right off the bat, we're never going to get venues here. And I'm going to tell you why. I've been in a pharmacy business for 40 years, and we did all kinds of different hiring process, and you have to have people with experience, and you have to have people with a wherewithal that know what's going on in order to have a successful business. What we need to do is figure out the timeline, Brian, that you need for hiring these new positions, because I'm an advocate that when we hire these positions, we need to have plenty of time to train these positions into what we need to do. And so you bring them in there cold and you have your first event and you haven't been dry run through stuff, it's going to be a failure. You want your first at least 2 or 3 events to be very successful so the word gets out there.
Absolutely. My timeline is my drop dead absolute last date that I want this position and the other utility worker positions on staff would be September 1st. Our grand opening is September 20th. That is a tight timeline because that only gives us 20 days of that training and everything transitioning over. The way I'm looking at it right now is for the hiring process that we have is going through with our personnel committee, committee of the whole, council, getting that approved, probably is going to put us mid-April before we advertise. We're going to want to advertise this position. Well, first, we have to offer it to current MAPE employees, which I don't foresee any MAPE employees being interested in this, but the right thing to do is to offer it to the MAPE employees, so that's at least a week there. So we'll say that that puts us at the end of April when we're able to then put it out on the street. We're going to want to advertise this position at least for a month to get people. That's the end of May. Then by the time you do your interviews, your background checks and everything, it takes a good 8 to 12 weeks to get a person through that whole process. So that's putting us getting this position on board sometime in August, which is pushing that drop deadline of September 1st. That's why we're bringing this to you today, is so that we don't put ourselves in the position where we are saying, hey, welcome to the team, your first event is tomorrow. I know you don't know the building, I don't know you don't know the staffing, you've had no warm up to what this event is coming, but this is called baptism by fire. We don't want to do that. We want all of our staff to have that time. In addition, we want to do some dry runs of events before the facility is open so that our staff is able to work out the kinks of how are we setting up. In addition to doing those dry run of events, as we're setting up for these different events, that's also when I'm planning on taking some of those marketing photos that we would be able to utilize for our packages that you guys had approved, so that we don't have the artist renditions, but we actually have physical photos of the event. But we would be able to essentially practice doing setup and tear down, because this is a new facility. There's going to be a lot of different things that we are doing in the MEC as opposed to what we have been doing in recent years in the minors. So our staff is going to have a mindset change of what day-to-day operations look like in the new building.
Okay. I know that one of the first big events that we've seen that's been booked already is the chamber dinner for October 21st, correct?
That is correct, and that
That's
is
gonna be
a
300
very
plus.
important event for us to have go off flawlessly.
Because that's a regional event, basically, because.
That is a regional event, and one of the reasons that we went and basically made a sales pitch to the chamber is we realized that those chamber members and those guests for the chamber banquet are potential customers for major other events in this facility. So we need to make sure that not only does it go off flawlessly, but their expectations are surpassed by our staff and our facility.
And that's the point I was making, Mayor, that we need to make sure that there's no hitches when we have these first number of events. That's, I've been there, been a lot of places throughout my career to see these big events, and if they go off flawlessly, you're going to get repeat business.
Yeah, so let's keep a narrow focus on the job description. Let's stay within this discussion about the job description itself, the facilities manager description we're discussing right now. All the peripheral stuff comes later on down the road. The question is get somebody on board, the timelines required to get it, get the proper training, make sure they're on board to get it done in the first place. I think they need more, as you indicated, August 1st would be the deadline from my perspective. Get somebody on board, do all these things you need to do, so you have that facilities matter ready to go, knowledge of the entire facility, that moving forward. So that's a timeline that I'd like to see on board, so I think we have to take a look at that. I think that can be accomplished. The second question I have before we go to Councilor Beyondich and then back to Councilor Paulson is that when you have a MAPE employee as yourself, who's directing and delegating and running the entire Park and Rec department, then you have another MAPE employee that has to report to you directly. So how do you supervise that MAPE employee? Can you answer that question for me?
Like the deputy chiefs and the fire chief and the deputy chief and the police chief, same thing.
Thank you. That was the answer I was looking for. Okay, thank you. Councilor Beyondich, do you have a question or a comment?
I do have a comment, and thank you for all the conversation. It opens up the thinking. But from my perspective, it is so important for that first contact person with this facility to be knowledgeable, to be helpful, to be kind, to be able to work with any type of personality. We've had one hiccup, and we need to make sure that we get the right person, whether it's with AFSCME or a contract person. And I'll use you for an example as an outsider coming in. Your first year here, I had gotten feedback. Sometimes the feedback wasn't positive, but we gave it. I said, let it ride, just let it go. Those same people came back to me and said, we like him, we can work with him, you worked with your crew, and I think that's what's important with a person in this position. They will have to take direction, and whether it's with AFSCME or outside, they have to know that's who they have to answer to. I mean, and now the employees, they come back to me and they tell me everything is great. So it may be a bumpy path, but I think it's important to weigh that out and get the right person in this job. It is vitally important for that first contact person to know how to handle this and to have the training in some of the hospitality to work with any type of person you're going to run across.
And you'll see in the job description, when not only do we get down to required knowledge, skills, and ability, but also education, we are looking for that hospitality-focused position. Because that is going to be the key aspect for this position, is that ability to bend over backwards to make the customer happy. So not only if you look at a wedding, the joke is that you have Bridezilla, or the mother-in-law is the issue. We want to make sure that this person is able to de-escalate Bridezilla and bring her back down so that her wedding goes off flawlessly, and not only do her guests have a good time, but she enjoys the experience, so that when her best friend goes to get married, she's recommending that they come here. Word of mouth is one of your best advertisers that you have, and your staff in how they treat people is where you develop your reputation.
You are spot on. Brides can be very difficult, but learning to deal with them and handle any situation that comes up is key.
Okay, thank you. And so part of that job description, that's just what Councilor Bionis, but that's just one part of the job description. It's rather comprehensive and moving forward. And so I'm sure that as this moves forward, as we approve it, moving forward, that the hard work begins then in finding that right person. Councilor Johnson has his light on, and then we'll go back to the committee member. Councilor Johnson.
Mayor Brian, when was the last time you worked a 40-hour week?
Couldn't tell you.
Because that is concerning to me as we look at the position and the need for it. And I knew the answer to that, but just wanted to clarify. I appreciate the clarification about how one member can take direction from another. I had made that same note, the fire department, the police department. And the person coming into this will know that Brian's their supervisor, so it would be a non-issue. It's just the levels of what they're doing. The MAPE position allows for the flexibility of more than 40 hours a week, evenings, weekends, that kind of stuff. Is that accurate?
Yes. Okay. Just like myself, I mean, I'm a MAPE member, but that doesn't mean that if I mess up, I'm still open for discipline. I have somebody that I report to, the city administrator. So, I mean, there are checks and balances for all positions in the city for maintaining, keeping things going the direction that they should be going.
Absolutely, and then above Britt is the city council and the mayor, and above us is our citizens. So
Yes.
you have more than one supervisor, just one gets to tell you directly what to do. So, I think that establishing that chain of command would be great. I appreciate the notes about previous staffing levels and what it looked like 10 years ago. Maybe if it's possible to get a snapshot of 10 years, 10 years, 10 years, 10 years, what that, I don't know what that would look like, but how, I've always lived here, but I've never participated as a child within city, other than going to the parks. And based on that, one of the things you had talked about is how things have changed since you've been here. I was at the park one day while the staff was raking the playground. There's a physical playground where the swings are, where the playgrounds are. I don't know that I'd seen that or heard of that being done before. And those are the little things about customer service that I think our citizens are noticing, but those are also the things that are going to burn you out, having to make sure that the floor at the MEC is cleaned, the raking is being done at Alcott, and the mowing's being done in Midway. So I appreciate that being as part of the way to establish the need for a specific position. One of the questions I do have is at the top, your time is divided by Parks and Rec and then the rec facility manager. And those are only for budgetary reasons, correct? I mean,
Correct.
there's going to be times when you're spending 75% of your time at the park, for example, I don't know, Land of the Loon, and other times you're going to be spending 75% of your time but those are just budgetary things, and everybody in the Parks and Rec department can be put either at the MEC, at the park, in Midway. They can be put wherever the service is needed, correct?
Exactly. Just like your Public Works Department, when we have a major snowstorm, it's all hands on deck for plowing and getting the streets open. Same thing for Parks and Rec. I mean, I would also foresee, you brought up Land of the Loon. Land of the Loon weekend, we may have some people from the MEC, if things are slow in the MEC, going and helping out for Land of the Loon. Also, if we have a major event coming in at the MEC, say we have a major concert coming in and we need all hands on deck there, we may be moving people from the park to the MEC to help out there. Ideally, though, we want to have our MEC staff doing the MEC and the park staff doing stuff in the park. That way, the entire facility, the entire program and all of our facilities are moving forward.
Where will the city have access? So let's say they finish the ballroom beginning of July. I'm just hypothetically. Can you utilize that space then for city events, for some of those dry runs ahead of time? So what I'm saying is we're talking about making sure we get it right. Can we do trainings there so we can practice setting up and utilizing that space ahead of time?
Not until we receive a certificate of occupancy.
Okay, so that's the key. But once that happens,
Then we can
start doing the dry runs and
our anticipation is receiving that certificate of occupancy by September 1st.
okay.
So that gives us that 20 days or 3 weeks that we are able to get in there and do those dry runs, get things organized, realize that, hey, where Brian said put the tables and chairs, they really need to be flip-flopped in the storage room for ease of access, and working out those kinks ahead of time so that when we get to our grand opening and then our first event, they're going off seamlessly. Because also keep in mind that for some of these events that we have one of the weddings that we have booked is they're doing their ceremony and their reception in the facility. The plan is to do the wedding ceremony on our outdoor patio and then come inside for their banquet. The question has been asked of us, and it was, okay, we're looking at a June wedding. Looking at Land of the Loon, what does it always do in June? It rains. So what if it's raining on their wedding day? So what we would do is, instead of utilizing the patio, we'd close off one of the walls in the banquet room and set up their wedding inside the two of the sections there. The wedding ends, then everybody would have to step out of the room. Our staff would then have 30 minutes to transform those two sections from wedding ceremony to banquet facility. So that is going to be an all hands on deck type day. We're going to have events like this. When you've gone to conferences and conventions, you have staff that is sometimes, okay, we're waiting for this lecture to end. We're standing at the door. As people come out, they're going in and transforming the room right then and there for the next event. That's what we are looking at doing. It's no longer going to be a facility that we are setting a room up 3 and 4 days ahead of time because, well, we have one event this week and we'll go ahead and get it set up now and it's done. That should not be how this building is operating. And if this building is going to cash flow and operate the way that we need it to operate, we're going to have these quick turnarounds, and our staff is going to have to be on the gun and ready to go.
And Ryan, that's exactly what I was looking at, and knowing that, you know, when we have that time ahead of time, we set up in the morning, we go to lunch, we come back and we change this, practicing that, because,
Yes.
it gives me a lot of comfort and security knowing that you have processed this and you have, I'm curious to know if you've written it down yet, or if it's still just all up in your head, but, you know, I think those are the kinds of things that will eventually come to fruition, so that if you're gone on vacation, which you better take sometime soon, that whoever is in charge, whether it be a custodial supervisor or the facility manager, it's written down so that we know there's the plan. And I think that's one of the things I'd like to see as we move forward for the first few years of the miners, that there's a binder that whoever steps in can say, this is how it worked good, it worked not, we're going to adjust this to meet our current needs. So I appreciate that. I have one more page. And then, and I just want to reinforce what Councilor Baraboo said about getting it right. One of the first years the chamber went up to a facility up north of town that was large enough to hold our event. It was a epic failure. The staff, they didn't have enough hostessing or waitress service staff. They didn't accommodate, and that year happened to be one of the mining company's years, was awarded the chamber member of the year or something. And that was my whole thought the entire time we were there. These people, the people that came, could have booked numerous events at that site in the next 5 years, and they probably chose not to because of how unorganized it felt. And that was from someone from the committee who knew what should have been going on, and we had anticipated these things and asked them ahead of time. So I'm confident that you're thinking those things because you've already done those things, and that to me gives me a lot of security in knowing that as we attain staff, you know the right questions to ask them so we can move forward with that. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk. Thank you, Mayor.
And getting that right person on staff is key. And there's nothing to say that we may not put this out on the street and not get that right person to apply the first time. But we have to hire that right person so that they are able to make sure that something like that does not occur. We also need to get them on board in enough time that they are able to sit down with everything that's been booked out and start making those pre-event contacts of, I know your event is still 2 months out, but want to start room planning with you for room setup. Make sure that we have all the white tablecloths on the correct tables and the black tablecloths on the correct tables. And so that when you walk in for your event, what you envisioned it being set up for is how it is set up.
Okay. All right. Let's get back to the facility manager's position, the job description of the facilities manager. This is all great conversation. It's probably going to be discussed even further. It's good information. We're moving forward in what we need to do in the MEC. I think we all understand that. But let's talk about the facility manager job description. That's what this committee is supposed to be talking about today, is this. So let's try to focus on the facilities manager position itself. All the other discussion is information that helps facilitate the need for this facilities manager. But let's talk about the job description itself, the need for the facilities manager, and how we're moving forward. So the relationship between the other MAPE, fire chief, assistant fire chief, police chief, fire chief, is the same relationship you're going to have. And so when Brian's gone, I'm assuming the facilities manager be the individual who's in charge, would report directly to our city administrator. So that being said, let's try to focus on that if we can, and so we can get this agenda moving forward. Councilor Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. So in the position overview, says such as overseeing programs and service delivery of the building, supervision of facility staff, safety and security systems, technology systems. So does that mean that when they are in that building, they are in charge of the security and technology systems? Or were we not talking about having a technology person? So I'd like that clarified.
At this point, we don't have the technology person, but this person is going to, if it is your event that is there and they are the point person for, that you are working with, and the projection screen is not working how you wanted it to, this person needs to have that knowledge and ability to get it working right now, not call in our tech support person if we have a IT person, because if your event is a Saturday evening and our IT person is not readily available, we don't want you to not have that screen working the way it should be. So this person needs to be.
I guess I'm trying to narrow down what this position is, and when you were looking at the Park Service description, a hospitality person such as this is going to probably possess those skills or not?
Yes, they will have that knowledge to do minor stuff. Now, if it is bringing in an all-new audiovisual system, no, they do not have that knowledge. But the knowledge of utilizing what the facility currently has and troubleshooting it, yes, they need to have that knowledge.
That's a reasonable
expectation
in that job description.
Yes.
And then at that point, though, other people are going to have to know the security and technology systems as well. It can't just be that
absolutely,
one
yes.
person in charge, though, because that's a 24/7 operation.
Correct.
Okay. And then going back, so I do want the pro forma on that. And then just going back to our hiring policy under MAPE, we've got our first round interviews, city administrator, HR director, 3 members of the city council. Second round interviews if necessary, city administrator, HR director, and city council. I would like it defined what is if necessary on second round interviews, because I really believe this is deserving of second round interview regardless of the point, the closeness of the points. I believe that the council should be a part of this process and have input on a second round interview process. So I don't know what the criteria is when we put that in there, if necessary, but I would like to state that I would like second round interviews to be conducted.
When we do the posting for this position, we'll list it that way, that first round interviews will be conducted, expected to be the week of whatever, second round is expected to be the week of whatever, so that whoever applies clearly knows you will be going through a 2-step process.
Okay, and thank you for that. I appreciate that, so we can put that out. And then the last question that I have is the person that is currently, I would say, in more of an administrative assistant role in Park and Rec, is that a retired, going to be coming up as a retired position, or would that person be interested in this position coming forward?
Given a notice that she does intend to retire this year, we don't have a date.
So this technically, I mean, will fall under MAPE, going internally for MAPE, and then externally, and then how have we posted in the past? Again, I'm going back, and I don't mean to be long-winded, but I'm concerned about how we're posting these things with the RFPs for the hotel, blah, blah, blah. I'm very concerned as to where we're posting these things to make sure we are getting the qualified candidates to come forward. I mean, Counselor Bearable is saying, you know, you're all saying there's a time constraint, but I don't want us just to have to say, okay, we need somebody, so we're just gonna, because we didn't go broad enough in our search. And I hope I'm making sense to you. We do need to get this right the first time, and I think it's very important we all understand what the expectation is for that posting and where it will be getting posted. Because, you know, like you, Brian, it was kind of a diamond in the rough. You came to us, we were shocked. I mean, that was a wonderful thing.
I found the job posting on the National Park and Recreation Association's webpage.
And I think that's wonderful. So I guess I'm just saying, like, in order to recruit that talent, we need to think a lot broader than hometown focused, Mesaba Daily and
Yes.
Duluth. So I want to make that very clear that that's my expectation of a city councilor. I would like that to be advertised according to the professionalism of that MAPE position. And I think that's all I have. Thank you.
I just have one more question for you before we go to Counselor Freely, Counselor Paulson. As far as the job description goes, as reviewing it at the committee level, and it'll be scrutinized and again reviewed at the committee home member, are you comfortable with the job description, or would you have some questions moving forward?
Well, you might not. I don't want to go on and on. I know this, okay.
No, I think it's important we discuss
I
this.
see big picture, and then I try to bring it in to the little tributaries that we need to deal with each step along the way. So the bumper cars are a big deal, in my opinion, because they're a revenue generator. So if you put a position together and you say, these are your responsibilities, and then you add a bumper cars where they're gonna have to maintain a schedule for that and blah, 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 then you're gonna maybe see another request come forward that I'm not getting paid enough, or there's additional job duties and da-da-da-da-da. So I think that's why I wanted the fitness center included and the bumper cars included, and what, it might not need to be in the description like you've got it, you know, you've got it says, function tasks provided are intended as illustrative of various types of work performed. So you've left that open, and I appreciate that. But I do think it's important we do come together and understand what that person is actually going to be responsible for, instead of hiring that person with just what we've talked about and then bringing other things in as job responsibilities, and then maybe that person, it's overwhelming. So from my perspective, I would like to see us vote on the bumper cars, get the finances together, or the financials together on what that looks like, what the management of that looks like, and then as well as the fitness portion of that, what those membership dues would look like, what the operation would, you know, the hours of operation. And I'm sorry if I'm asking too much, but I think this is very timely. We do have a very short window in terms of our opening, and I think it's timely to actually have these discussions. Thank you. Sorry.
No, thank you,
I'm sorry,
Counselor.
but
Oh,
other than
that's-
that, the
yeah.
job description is fine as long as we have, I mean, in my opinion, as long as we have all of the things that this person is going to be responsible for as part of that interview process, or already part of that thought process. Does that make sense, Brian?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
It's a lot more detailed than giving them a key to the building and showing them where their desk is.
And then as we drill down to the, you know, the nitty-gritty of what is required, I think this committee's responsibility is to determine whether this job description is adequate, whether this job description is comprehensive, and whether we want to make sure that this is a job description we want to move to the committee of the whole meeting for additional discussion, for the information you've asked for the information that Councilor Freely was asked for, and the information that was disseminated in a broader perspective from Councilor Johnson and Councilor Beyondich and Councilor Baraboo. So I think we have a focus moving forward, so we're gravitating in that direction. Councilor Freely.
I do genuinely and sincerely respect and appreciate the work that you do, Brian.
Thank you.
And I'm empathetic to that, but this might be some apples to oranges a little bit in reference to the 40-hour work week, because I worked in administration myself. And there should, by nature, no administrative position is a 40-hour work week. There shouldn't even be an expectation of that, because you're essentially on duty 24/7, 365 as needed. And there were oftentimes I was in my office at 6 a.m. and not home till 10:30 at night when I had to stay and supervise volleyball, basketball, and so on. So again, I'm empathetic, but not sympathetic to that. So that's
Correct.
why I question the necessity for what we're looking at. But I am ready to move forward with the MEC facility manager job description, with the caveat being that we need some additional information as requested, pro forma, calendared events, anything that's supporting documentation with regard to legitimizing and justifying the need for this position coming forward. So I would make the motion that we move that to the next committee of whole for further discussion with that supporting documentation that will assist us in making the decision as to whether or not this is something we should in fact hire and/or.
Thank you. Counselor Freely moves from the Personnel Committee to move the Facilities Manager job description to the next committee, the whole meeting, for further discussion with additional documentation to be provided by staff. Is there support?
I'll support.
Support by Counselor Paulson. Did you get that, Pam? Thank you. Any further discussion from anybody? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, motion carries. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Brian.
Just for full disclosure, I do want to point out that we will be coming forward to ask for 2 new utility workers to also be in place by the time the building opens September 1st.
Absolutely, you're sure.
I don't know if where the council feels the timeline should be when we want to post that. We have to post internally, of course, first.
Okay, well, there's an issue from the Personnel Committee, so I'll defer to the other committee members as well, and anybody else who wants to chime in, that it's important that we recognize the need for that. We've discussed it at length about the need for that. The question is that when we pull the trigger? I think sooner than later, because those new people have to also, come under the job training or the on-the-job training from those professionals who currently work at the miners to help them understand the needs, because they're going to be trained as well. So I think we need to take a look at that. Any additional information there?
Only have 20 days to get the building dry runs done. We have 20 days to move in. So
Right. Well, that's why it's important.
to have these staff on
Have
board.
the staff on board before.
And if we can, I know the intent, and Eric Wedge is on the phone here, but if we have, I know the intent is as the building portions start to open up with the life safety and the occupancy, we will start moving in as we can. So we may be moving in phases, but that's where all hands on deck is really, really important.
And I think that's why it's important, from my perspective, that you have to have the facilities manager on board before September 1st, if that's possible, as soon as you can, and the utility workers as well. So, Councilor Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm comfortable with the new utility workers, as you have stated. I think that's a need, and if you could just clarify, Britt, on the flow chart, we've got utility workers, Spoler, 0.25 crossed out, 0.25 FTE crossed out, and utility worker Judnick, 0.25 FTE crossed out. So it looks like Judnick is moving into a different role, and then what is it just moving up, or is it different FTE?
They actually, in the winter, they work at the park. They work at the park all year, but during the winter, we pull them down to work at the MEC. And we're not going to, for 1 day a week, we're not going to pull them down anymore. We need full-time dedicated people. So they'll go to the park and stay at the park. So there is, Brian's here, there is 1 day, I think, of the week that there's only one person at the park because 2 of them are at the MEC, so.
Which is, it makes sense, so.
It kind of, yeah.
So throughout the wintertime, on Mondays, we only have 2 people in the park, which is the minimum that you need to flood our outdoor rinks. Now, if we get snow, that means that they're probably not going to get all the outdoor rinks flooded. By making this change and having them just designated park year-round, then we have a full park staff 5 days out of the week.
And do they have a choice in this, or is that just something that the city can move them in and out? And are they amicable? Are those 2 employees amicable to this switch?
Yeah, we have had discussion with the
Yes.
employees, and we have told them that we would give them the option, if they want to come to the MEC full-time with Brian alluded to a modified schedule, if they like the modified schedule and they want to move from park to the MEC, that we would allow that to happen.
And I think you worked that out. I mean, we're asking for the 2 positions. That's what we want to do. So how you accomplish that, would be between staff and the bargain unit.
Yeah, we're in the process right now of going through that. Once we can get the okay from you to hire these two people and maintain them two at the park, they'll have the ability to bid down to the minors if they choose to, through the process of the bidding, but if they choose to stay, they will be able to. They won't be able to bump out or anything. So the sooner that we can get this going, the quicker that we can come up with the hour schedule that we're actually going to vote on today. And then in return, we can get these people there, because if we have to pull them two down to the MEC, you're going to leave one guy up at the park and there's pretty much nothing they can do.
That's a life safety issue, too.
It's a safety issue. If a tree comes down, you need at least 3 people to take the tree down. And being right now, we're so short we have one person already from the minors that actually is in the library. Because of seniority, they have to fill that position because we have people out hurt in many different departments, so we're all over the place. We're short everywhere, so if we can get these coming in, it would be beneficial for everyone.
Thanks for that, Scott. And
Yep.
I'm comfortable moving that forward, so I'll make a motion to move the 2 new utility workers forward to the next, would it be the next committee of the whole or council? Committee of the whole.
So Counselor Paulson makes a motion to move the approval of hiring 2 utility workers at the MEC facility and for discussion at the next committee of the whole meeting. Is there support for that?
I'll support for discussion.
Support for discussion, further discussion. First, Counselor Freely, and then over to Counselor Johnson. Counselor Freely.
I guess I know we need these things, but Sherry, I'm just, when we're talking about hiring a facility manager for the facility at the MEC, 2 new utility workers, we're paying $7,500 a month to the Lundin Group. It's like, have we hit the jackpot, or how do we actually afford all of this in a city without additional revenues from some source? Or do we have that incoming and we're going to be able to manage accordingly?
Good
Honestly.
question. Chairman?
Sherry, Finance Director / HR Director. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I knew this question was going to come about. Yes, Brian here is definitely on the hook for getting these events in. I'm going to hold his toes to the fire. But we also are going to be getting some money in that we did not budget for. And it's a considerable amount. I'm not going to spend it all on employees, but it will definitely help move this forward. I mean, the timing couldn't be better.
Good.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Freely.
Mayor,
Well, Counselor,
I was just going to tack on to Sherry's. Do you mind, because I know do you want to know what the amount of money is? Because I know what the amount of money is, or do you rather not say that at this? Okay, because Sherry's right, it's a significant amount of money.
Counselor Johnson?
And just, Brian, a question, getting these folks on relatively quickly, there's still plenty of other stuff to do within Parks and Rec that we could get caught up on some projects that have been put off in the past prior to moving?
Absolutely. And also keep in mind the amount of time it takes to hire.
2 to 3 month process, yes, sir.
Yes, so a 2 to 3 month process, we're midsummer. So it's not like we're looking at that much more time. I know September sounds a long ways away, but it's not that far away at the speed of government.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Johnson. So it's been moved and supported to move the 2 utility positions from the committee, the Personnel Committee, to the next Committee of the Whole meeting for further discussion and potential approval. Is there any further discussion before we adjourn to the next? Counselor Paulson.
One quick question. Will these be posted internally first or internally, externally at the same time?
Per the bargaining unit, they will be posted internally. Once that post closes, if it is not filled, then it can be posted externally. So our current employees would have the opportunity to bid into these positions if they so desired. And that's why we're working with Ask Me right now for the staff schedule, because that will determine for several people if this is an attractive position that they want to bid into.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, so it's been moved and supported, once again, to move the 2 utility worker positions for approval for discussion at the next committee of the whole meeting, which is April 6th. Is there any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, everybody.
The next item is the request for appeal of pay from the AFSCME position. We received one request this year as per their contract, and the language is in the packet. They have the ability, their right, to request an appeal of their position and subsequent pay by submitting a request for evaluation between January 1st and February 1st of each year. We received one request from Debbie Judnick of the Fire Department. She is, I believe it's a program assistant / IT specialist 2. We have had the 2 required meetings. The first meeting is with 3 management personnel and 3 union personnel. And then after that, it's myself and Sherry meet with AFSCME to discuss potential wage adjustments.
Okay.
I placed on your desk the copy of the job description and the potential wage adjustment.
You've had 2 previous meetings, is that correct?
As per the contract, we have to meet first with the 3 management and 3 AFSCME personnel to discuss the request. And then subsequently, then AFSCME meets with Sherry and I to discuss any potential wage adjustments.
Okay, so in conjunction with those meetings, you went through the job description as you normally do with respect to this. You've come up with a determination as to what you feel is appropriate, and you did come to us in the agreement, so that's why it comes before the Personnel Committee. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so. All right, I've had a chance to review this job description at length. And I know when this job description was originally put out, and when this employee went from one department to the other, has been working underneath the supervision of the fire chief and the staff. And this information within this job description, I looked at some of the job descriptions. Some of the issues I have is with respect to the IT position, questions that I would have. The qualifications of working knowledge of Microsoft 2000, Server 2003, Windows 98. I mean, that's really old and antiquated. I mean, this job description is not up to date. So, from my perspective, there's a lot of other things in here that I looked at that I have questions about. But I will refer to the rest of the Personnel Committee and any other member of the council that may have some questions about it as well. We might as well open it up because it's likely going to go to the Committee of the Whole meeting for discussion, most likely. I don't know if that's the case or not, but let's see where it goes. Councilor Friedlieb.
So this job description is an answer to Ms. Judnick's letter, and it's just essentially
A rate increase.
and re-evaluating her position and creating a job description
That more
that's
accurately
comparable
aligns
to
with what
that.
she's doing, yes.
And I thought she did a really nice job of justifying and legitimizing the need for such, given the additional duties she's assumed over the course of time. So I'm comfortable with what I see. And I guess if Chief Lewis wants to speak to that in regard to support to that, or anybody else that wants to advocate on her behalf, I'm welcome to hear that as well, just for supporting documentation.
Yeah, thank you. Amanda Metza, the representative for AFSCME Local 454. Real quick, before you go, oh, no, go ahead, thank you. Welcome.
Okay. I don't have a whole lot to add. We are here to answer questions. What we would say is that, of the job reviews that we have looked at in previous years, this was kind of an atypical one. There aren't a lot of changes that came to the actual job description, but as you noted, to the employees submitted to the job review committee, a discussion about the types of work that changed and the amount of work that has increased as a potential justification for the wage increase that we have a tentative agreement on with through this process. So, a lot of times jobs come and like you noted, they need updating in terms of the types of software that's used or additions of different types of works. There are some additions here, but a lot of it has to do with changes to the department structure itself. So I just wanted to be sure that that's something that you guys are taking into consideration as you look at this, so.
Okay, yeah, thank you. If you just want to, you might want to, okay, so I just picked that one, just one out. I look at others, administers a city website. That's done by another staff member, is that correct?
Nope, she's responsible for the fire department website.
So the fire department, that's not the city website.
Not the city one, right.
The fire department website, right? So, I mean,
Legitimately, she does have we do need to adjust her job.
I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but I'm saying is that I don't think this job description is updated.
No, and that's why her request coming forward, we need to update her job description to more
So-
accurately.
So I think before we make a decision about a salary adjustment, I think we have to have a proper job description attached to this, a new comprehensive job description with respect to this.
And we also need to draft an MOU, but before I draft the MOU, I wanted to make sure the personnel committee understood where we're going, how this is happening, and what's
Sure.
going forward.
Sure, thank you very much. Amanda?
So process-wise, I mean, I think what's before you today is to address the agreement from the job review committee that this move forward. And then there would need to be an MOU with a fully updated job description that would come before the council. So this is a step along the process, and yes, there are still some changes that need to be made. And I think everyone's aware of those. However, there's this issue of, can we move this forward, and can we take this, continue this through the process, so.
Sure, thank you. Just for me, and I'll go with the other committee members, I don't have a problem with the recommendation made by staff. They're looking at the wage increase changes. I know that's going to maybe trigger some additional job description review requests in the future. That's something we will deal with at that point in time. But for me, in order for me to make a decision about an increase, and if there are additional duties and responsibilities, I need to see an updated, job description, before we move forward. That's the way I look at it, but I'm amenable to taking a look at what the recommendation from the committee is. Councilor Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. And when Britt had sent this, I don't know if you sent it this morning or last evening, but when I reviewed it this morning, I actually was thinking, because there's a strike through at the top, I was thinking that this is the most current. It's a IT specialist is stripped through, and then it says 2021 wage with the old wage and then the new proposed wage. So I would be in agreement with the mayor. When these things come forward, they need to be accurate, or we can't, under technology specialist essential functions, 12, administers city website. It says city website, VITA website, email, firewalls, gateways, and antivirus systems. I don't know how this can be brought forward either by the union or by the employee or by the city without it being accurate to begin with. You can't, there's nothing for us to really go on. Other than Debbie's letter, which I think is very justifiable, and I'm not in disagreement with her overall duties that have changed and her compensation hasn't. My next question is, when do these job descriptions, how often do they get reviewed? If this is from the 80s, that seems a little negligent on I don't know whose behalf, but these things should be reviewed accordingly, and I don't know if AFSCME reviews them or supervisors review them or whomever reviews them, but that's very surprising that this has not been reviewed since the 80s.
Position was actually created in the 2000s, so it's not that old. And it was reviewed once previously.
But the job description, who just said it was from the 1980s? Somebody just said
No,
that.
I said that looking at that one
That's what I heard.
about Windows 98.
Oh, 98
Right,
Windows.
that I was referring to the language in the contract under knowledgeable skills. Well, we don't have Windows 98 anymore, and so it was just an example that I was using
Sorry, I
about
misheard
having
that.
yeah.
So I get, going to my question though, is how often should these job descriptions be reviewed, especially if technology is changing or things are changing within departments? And obviously, the fire department has seen a lot of different growth of, as she stated, I think 40% growth. So I'm curious as to why these things don't get done, and then we have to have someone go through this process instead of it just being an automatic, let's go through a review of your job description.
Yeah, and I think that, I'd like to see updated job descriptions. I know that there's contractual language that provides the employee the opportunity in AFSCME contract to ask for a performance review within a certain amount of time. But for me, you know, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but, you know, as a former president of a union, as secretary of treasury and vice president for many, many years, when we went into contract negotiations, we looked at every job description we had within our employee group and determined if there's an increase, it had to be done, a request to change that job description that came during that process. And now the job, we've settled our contract, and now we're having this review based upon contract language. But I would ask Sherry to give us some additional information that may be helpful to some of the questions that Counselor Paulson had. Sherry?
Sure, thank you. Counselor Paulson, to answer your question, job descriptions should be reviewed on an annual basis when they have their annual performance review done by their department head. Then it should be brought to HR or the city administrator and say, but in the past, we have a lot of jobs out there, and as everybody knows, you stand still for like 6 months, technology has outpaced you. So we're trying to get more job descriptions that are a little more generic and not box you in so much. But this is the opportunity that AFSCME has in their contract so that they don't fall through the cracks. That, hey, look at, my job is, you know, and I understand the chief is here. You know, he's been busy too. He may not have realized, or, you know, I mean, so, but to answer your question, it should be done on an annual basis.
On an annual basis, okay. And then since we just did this whole AFSCME update with each other, I guess I'm surprised that that did not get caught before this employee had to take these steps of action instead of when we just ratified our new, by removing, sunsetting certain positions when we all sat here at the table together. Do you remember that, Amanda? That why that this wouldn't have been brought forward, apparently, that this wasn't a concern by Ms. Judnick at that time?
So actually, that actually occurred prior to that meeting. This happens in January. You know, and members have a contractual time period in order to bring forward concerns with their job description, which is annually in January. And so she did submit this in January, and then we had meetings following that. So the time period that you're referring to when we had that meeting versus the job review committee meetings actually overlapped. And the job review is a contractual, it's a piece of the contract. It's, any employee can bring their job forward if they feel that it's gotten out of date.
Sure, so she brought that forward in January, and we all met, I would think, after that.
Yep.
In February. So I'm curious as to why that didn't get brought forward in conversation at that discussion.
I guess from our perspective, it's a separate process from what we were discussing at that point. The job review is its own process per the contract and has its own steps to follow. And so
But
that's
just to make the council aware that that was happening, that wasn't a consideration at that time.
I had notified you guys along the way when she submitted the request and when of the process as it was going. It's not part of the contract negotiations because it's not necessarily something that the whole union body would vote on as part of the contract negotiation. This is something that's binding between the city council and the AFSCME body. Once the council makes a decision, it's not grievable, it's just a binding action.
So when we went through those job descriptions at that time, which we did,
those were for new positions, though.
Them were positions that were created in the engineering department, so you guys were eliminating positions and creating new ones. That's the meeting that we had, where we had to come up with, not necessarily the job description, but actually come up with the wage. Is what we meant about there. This review process is done on a whole different.
okay, and I appreciate that, but just knowing that this whole new positions within the fire department was also coming forward, which we also did have a conversation. I guess I'm just surprised that this wasn't part of that conversation.
It's not a new position.
Right, and I would totally agree with her. I'm just curious as to why we're at the point in the process of the employee coming forward and the job description not being changed on an annual basis to reflect.
Can I just address that? Maybe. So this position was, it was updated and retitled in 2015. And so as far as jobs that come up for review or look backs by, I mean, the job description isn't like one from the 1980s. It is fairly recent and it's fairly updated. She felt that it did not accurately reflect the amount of her responsibility and that there were some small changes. You know, in 2015, 2003 server may have been accurate, but it may need to be updated at this point. So there are changes that she was suggesting, but by no means I don't think that this is one that has gone, you know, an excessive amount of time without
6
full
years
review.
is excessive if it should be reviewed on an annual basis. 6
I am
years-
not aware that job reviews are happening on an annual basis, right? That is why this language
Just to
exists.
point out, when we do performance reviews, we can talk about your job description and management can change your job description. We can't change your wage.
Right.
So we could have changed her job description every year, but she never would have got an increase in wage. The only way to get increase of wage is by appeal of pay, this process.
Okay, all right, I appreciate that, and I think that, thank you, Sherry.
And I'm sorry if I meant that it has to be done annually. If your job hasn't changed a whole lot, there's no point in changing your job description annually unless there's been some major changes. But that's the opportunity for a department head to sit down and go through their, hey, this is where, you know, your job requires this, and if they're saying, no, I don't do that anymore,
I
that's
think
the opportunity.
what I would say to that is our city is completely evolving right now, that it would be very important for department heads to be very aware of changing job descriptions as we move forward.
Can I just add one thing to
Well,
that?
you know, yeah, Brenda, please.
Just
No,
one
yeah,
item
please.
on that.
No, go
So
ahead.
of course, the city has the right, you know, contractually and as an employer to change job descriptions. What I would say is that if there are annual reviews and annual changes of every single job description, that creates a huge burden administratively on your staff, because the obligation that the city does have on the back end of that is to negotiate over those changes. So you can make those changes, we have the right to negotiate then on the wage of those changes. And so if we're negotiating the wage of 20 job descriptions every year, that's a huge burden, which is why I think the review committee exists. Certainly, we don't want jobs to come forward, you know, every 10 years. But the idea is that we can say, here are 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 jobs, you know, annually that need to have a look back and have an update. And it gives employees the opportunity to request that those jobs be brought forward. Hopefully, as Sherry said, they're taking a look at their job description and keeping notes, you know. But I think also, frankly, as a matter of practice, a lot of times changes add up, right? It's not necessarily something that you would see that needed to be changed in your job description. You know, that's a huge additional burden. I think what Debbie's is the perfect example of this, right? Where things added up over the last couple of years and now are worthy of their own line item. And so sometimes it doesn't make sense or it can't be reflected on an annual review. And I guess that's why the process exists, and that's why we talked about it during this contract negotiations. It's very important to our membership. But it also streamlines the process for your administrative staff and then for the council, right, to take these up for review.
And
Just because of
I
that piece.
appreciate that, and I appreciate Sherry answering that question and fully clarifying it's an annual review, not necessarily annual job description change. So that's completely clear to me. However, in just, I can think of a couple different scenarios when it's been brought forward because things have changed, whether it's going over point whatever to Evelyn or IT this or IT that. We have had changes, and those changes come in form of a pretty much, I would think, an MOU that have come forward in terms of their job increase, but not necessarily in the order of the job description changing first. So that's what I'm encouraging to, if there are changes, that job description needs to change and be fluid with the employees, you know, changing positions or changing roles prior to the request of a wage negotiation. I think that would be the proper process. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that would be the proper procedure instead of the employee then coming forward and asking for additional dollars when the job description has not fully reflected their new positions or removal of those positions. And I don't know what the normal process is, but when it's come forward, it's kind of been backwards from where we've stood as approving different duty changes. instead of the job description being changed, we're approving the dollar amount first. So I guess I'd like to see that process tighten up.
Thank you, Counselor Paulson. I don't see any other lights on right now. I go by the recommendation of staff. We try to, because, you've done your due diligence, you have the meetings with the bargaining units about coming up with a wage, and I don't have a problem, with that process. I think the recommendation is we rely on the recommendation of staff during this process, whether it's a employee review or whether it's a contract negotiation, whatever the case may be. But from my perspective, in order for me to justify, and I think we should probably move this, to the next committee, the whole meeting for further discussion. I'd like to see an updated job description before we approve the wage increase. Because you look at the job description the way it was before, now you're asking for an increase in your duties and responsibilities, and I haven't seen those changes in respect to what that is, and the condensing of this and updating some of the, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 issues there already to talk about. So by updating the job description first, and I think if we could have that job description updated by the next committee of the whole meeting, if that's possible, so we could take a look at the actual job description as amended, or deleted, or amended, or changed, or increased, or whatever the terms are, and then we can discuss it at the committee of the whole meeting. We'll have a current, accurate, up-to-date job description to look at the justification for the salary increase that's being requested, and that has been negotiated through your meetings. That's the way I look at it. But before we move forward, I would ask any non-committee members have any questions or comments? Okay, thank you. Looking for some council actions or some additional information with respect to this. So the request is here for us to review the job description and then actually the wage adjustment that's requested by the ASME employee to increase the wage from $29.96 an hour to the proposed new wage of $30.46 an hour. And so I'm looking for some council or some committee action moving this to the next committee, the whole meeting. I'd like to see an updated job description before we move forward with that. So that being said, Councilor Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move an updated job description being brought forth by the city staff, and upon review of the committee of the whole, then go ahead and approve the wage increase. But
Thank you.
not prior.
Take a look. Yes, okay, thank you.
I'll support.
Moved by Councilor Paulson and supported by Councilor Freely. Did you get that motion, Pam? Okay, any further discussion? Does anybody from the ASME union, Scott or Amanda, do you have any other information like before we move this to the committee of the whole meeting? Chief? Anything before we move? Thank you very much. Moved and supported. Is there any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Anything else, Britt? Well, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for the committee for, it was a long meeting, but very productive. And thank you to Councilor Baraboo, Councilor Beyondich, and Councilor Johnson for attending. And so no other further action to come before the Personnel Committee. We will stand adjourned. Thank you.